This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box to this episode. Patreon is a monthly subscription and you can cancel anytime. And PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.
Joseph Haboush. I've been a journalist with the Daily Star for the last 3.5 years and based in Beirut. Things don't look great. I mean, you have an unprecedented economic situation in the country. But, in order for the system to change, which is what it seems like a majority of the people in Lebanon want, it's going to take time. And you have to win, the small battles. You have to make small achievements and basically take it step by step.
You work for a celebrated institution when it comes to reporting in Lebanon. And it goes without saying, the Daily Star, which has survived many obstacles in not just the Civil War, recent history. And that, I think, is a testament to the abilities of Lebanese reporters and journalists and the dedication that they have to covering what's been happening. And I include you in that much larger story. And I wanted to just ask you, and I know it's a bit of a sensitive subject, I just want to get it out of the way. We talked about discussing what's been happening in the last 10 days to the Daily Star. I'm not privy to any particular information. Is there anything that you can share with what's been happening and maybe the future of the paper?
Yeah, I personally, my last day was last Friday at the Daily Star, and it wasn't it wasn't because of the situation at the newspaper. It's more of a personal issues and the situation in the country as a whole that I made the decision. But in terms of the Daily Star, look, it's no secret the media sector in Lebanon as a whole is suffering, and obviously the Daily Star is not on an island. So it's suffering like the other outlets, TVs, newspapers. But, on that side of things, on that topic, there's been a number of people that have either, left. Basically, they've resigned or they've left at the Daily Star. But you can ask, not coming from me, you can ask anybody that has left before me that none of them were owed a penny from the paper. So despite the difficulties, they do exert all efforts to make sure that nobody's owed any amount of money once they leave the newspaper. That's the the financial side of the paper. On the side of reporting, that's one thing that I thoroughly enjoyed throughout my time at the Star. One is the level of professionalism, and I think it has to do a lot with the top down with the editor-in-chief, just the way he works and the way we're taught to work in terms of being objective. And we work more like a wires agency in terms of the style of reporting.
Yes.
And, that's the reporting side in the news. But in terms of, just persevering and plugging along despite the difficulties, it's something that obviously, I truly valued while I was there. I'll always, treasure that aspect of the newsroom. People just really work from, because they're passionate, because they care. And at the end of the day, it's something that we, as journalists, you're doing something that you love. So, you just keep pushing along.
I just want to push one step further on this without, and I know I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to overstep or anything, but I know that the physical paper stopped printing roughly 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, give or take a few days. The online version, is that still available, or is that also being?
Yeah. So when the decision was taken to and I stress here, temporarily suspend the print edition,
Yes.
The online continued. It's still continuing as is now. Obviously, during my last 2 weeks, there was no my last 2 weeks there was no print. So
Hmm.
the style, I mean, the stories still remain the same. We were just, publishing them. We had a page one political rap pretty much every day on
Yeah.
page one. So instead of waiting to publish that, which all the print stories would go up on the website at midnight anyway.
Hmm.
So that rap, for example, is being published now at around 10 p.m. local time.
Okay.
And then all the other stories, I mean, we were still reporting them and then pushing them out,
And is that is
just
that
throughout the day.
is that and for the foreseeable future, is that more or less secure that the online version is here to stay at least for the time being, or is that
Yeah, I
also
mean,
sort of okay? So that's not
no,
that's
as
not
far
being
as I
phased.
know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
as far as I know, the online is not just the online. I mean, well, the online is definitely there to stay, but
Hmm.
from what I heard, in the sense that I got just based on the statement that was released by the Star when the decision was made to suspend print,
Yeah.
was that it was temporary.
Okay.
And I mean, up until my last day, I was confident that the print edition would return. And obviously, I hope that it does.
I find it very strange when I'm in New York meeting absolute strangers when it comes to the Lebanese story, and that they mention a Daily Star piece. And for me, this is so bizarre. It's like, how do you even know about the Daily Star? But they know it, and I think that it's. I mean, I know times have changed in terms of all types of media are evolving when it comes to the digital age, and I know that it's more difficult for a traditional newspaper in an economic under dire circumstances to persevere. But all that said, I still hold some. I hold not just nostalgia. It's that I know that paper is critical to sharing the wider story, and not just in Lebanon, but and not just the diaspora, but an international audience. So I hope
Yeah,
Daily Star makes its way through this current situation.
yeah,
And
yeah. Just to
yeah.
add on that, I obviously travel back and forth a lot to the States,
Hmm.
and I mean, I meet with people in Washington and other cities, but mainly, in Washington, whenever I'm meeting with somebody, either diplomats or officials or whoever it may be, it's funny. I mean, people will show me their phone. These are officials, high-ranking officials. They'll show me their phone, and you'll see how they're communicating between each other and sending links of stories on the Daily Star.
It's yeah,
Um,
exactly. And it's not like I mean the other sources are there. They're in the story. You see people sharing all types of information, but it's just
right.
always sort of the Daily Star still stands out, and I think it's
Yeah.
just because of its longevity and its reputation, and it I think it still is the standard for English journalism and reporting.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of its talent are leaving, I have been lucky over the years before I started this podcast to befriend many journalists who started their careers at the Daily Star,
Mhm.
and now they've moved on to other things. But it's almost like it's the springboard for talent when it comes to analyzing not just Lebanon but the region.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah,
I think I completely agree. I mean, a lot of the big names in the region, old, young, they've all at some point gone through the Daily Star.
yeah,
And like you said, I do think it's I think I kind of look at it as a school,
yeah,
um, but to be completely honest, because you're learning the trait there, and all eyes are on you. People, I mean, obviously the reporters are poached a lot by bigger agencies,
yes,
international agencies, because they know obviously the standard is high there,
yeah.
and the way we were taught to report and write is something that's highly respected. So yeah, I mean, here's to it, how the days start coming back, and better than before.
Hope so, and I know that it's only fair to put its problems within the larger Lebanese context. that everyone is going through variations of difficulty. And I also know that it's fair to criticize it when necessary. And some of these voices are friendly voices that have been on the podcast that have immense respect for the paper itself, but also frustrations with their own personal situation within the paper. But that's, I think, that speaks more to the Daily Star, which is what you said, that when you leave, you still get everything you're owed, which is a good thing. I think that's important. I wanted to shift from the Daily Star and maybe get into the wider story about reporting in a time of social media. And before we started this recording, you said something which I think it speaks volumes, even though it was a very casual remark. You said that you hadn't listened to any episode of the podcast, but you had seen the snippets on Instagram, and you maybe heard these 1-minute clips. And to me, it's so important that you said that, because you are a reporter. You said 3.5 years, a career in the Daily Star, newspaper, journalism, traditional reporting, but you only went to Instagram to hear what discussions about all that's been happening. And that speaks volumes, that Instagram is very important. Twitter is very important. WhatsApp is very important. So I want your perspective. Let's not go back 3.5 years. Let's just talk about really the beginning of the protests. So late October and then today, these 4 months, 4+. Did you get your information through social media, or did you actually did you turn to maybe sources that are, I don't want to say dying, but that they're the old way of communication, or just from your own reporting? How did you access information?
When an event as big as one like the protests happen, you got to go to all the different types of sources and outlets you can go to, because you got to fact check. You got to see, one place might have something that you missed in another. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I didn't have just one. I wasn't just on Twitter or just on Instagram. But I'm more of an old school kind of guy. So I was calling, but the thing is, I would see something if I wasn't out if I wasn't in the field, I'd see something on social media and then make a phone call and try to, either find out where that thing's happening, go check for myself, or try to get confirmation over the phone.
So you were relying on the old phone call method, literally making that call.
Yeah. I mean, that's just something I feel more comfortable doing than just relying, because on the flip side, as good as social media can be, I think you can have, when right before the protests happened, there were huge wildfires throughout the country, and there were videos popping up from different countries, different years, different, so you didn't know if it was, some of the videos that you were seeing, if they were happening then, or if they were basically fake videos.
I believe some of them were even from Greece, that they were just sort of repeat photos. Yeah,
in Greece, and then somewhere in Syria. And I mean, some people it might be an accident. It might be done on purpose. It just might be done out of a lack of being careful and fact checking.
Right.
But that's the downside of social media. Plus, you get into, I post something that I know will get likes or retweets or whatever you want to call it. So it's going to get me more popular. I'll become more popular. People will start talking about me. I'm not talking about me personally. I'm just saying about the mentality of some who post these things and go to social media immediately because they're seeking, attention, which unfortunately in this day and age, a lot of the hires that are made in journalism are made based on your visibility and how far your audience reaches.
But that's actually, that was my second point, which is I did come across Daily Star pieces, at least before before the paywall, there is
Mhm.
you can actually access a chunk of the article, but not necessarily the entire article.
Right.
But there are some articles that just are open and you can click on them through Twitter.
Mhm.
But I'll be honest, I rarely turned to traditional outlets. I found myself quickly adapting to Instagram and WhatsApp groups and that kind of that new way of spreading information. I mean, does this fit into not the Daily Star in particular, but just the struggles of older media? That is there a built-in reluctance to kind of be that visible? And which is what you're describing in a sense that there's almost, you're doing the I don't want to say the old way, but let's say uh the more, I don't know if
I'm old
cautious.
school. I'm old school. You can say it.
I mean, it's a more conservative approach that
Yeah.
has worked for many years, and it's what you're doing. You're spending money on these phone calls, and you're trying to verify, your information the old way, which I think is
Mhm.
probably the correct method. But then at the same time, you have these newer outlets, whether it's Megaphone or even Beirut Today or Fauda, and these kinds of very, very catchy, and also they have content, but the content may not be the story itself. It's more the quick, instant gratification of keeping up at the moment. And
Yeah.
it's usually photography, it's usually video, it's that kind of you know on the scene live citizen journalism.
Yeah. I mean, look, like you said, the I think you mentioned maybe three other newer outlets that are
Hmm.
coming, making a name for themselves in Lebanon, or have made a name for themselves recently. But
Hmm.
that you're kind of, you got to look at the different types of audiences, because
Hmm.
if you're coming from let's say a diplomatic community or government officials, yeah, sure, they're going to go to the outlets that you mentioned, but their main source of information that it's not going to be them. I mean, with all due respect to them, they're not going
Right,
to go to
right.
one of those to find out a lot of the stuff that they want to find out. They obviously, there may be things that they can find out there that they definitely cannot find at the somewhere like the Daily Star, in terms of having someone on the ground, taking live videos or what have you. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's basically up to, based on your preference, what kind of news you want.
Hmm.
You might not have a long feature on, the three outlets you mentioned. I'm not targeting them by any means, but we're just talking about them. You won't find, a long feature on Syrian refugees and their struggles in Hafsid or elsewhere in
Absolutely,
Lebanon.
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
on the other hand, they do highlight a lot of, I think they highlight a lot of things that should be highlighted. They do good work, I mean, those outlets, but like I said, you don't have the variety of the things you have at traditional media outlets.
But in your,
And
but just sorry to interrupt, but from your
yeah,
own side, do you sense that is there a diminishing patience for content heavy information? And I mean,
I mean,
and I
yeah, go
don't
ahead.
necessarily mean in just that. Again, not the Daily Star in particular, but just
Mm,
the average attention span for an audience given the last 4 months. That that and I'm only going to give an example that links to the Daily Star, which is I did an episode with Timur Azhari, who
mm-hmm,
only recently left the Daily Star, and
mm-hmm,
I mentioned to him that I discovered him through Twitter,
mm-hmm,
and I didn't know that he was. I mean, his articles. I don't think I read one of them, but I read
mm-hmm.
all of his tweets, and
Right.
I watched his video feeds, and I kind of, when I was not in Martyrs Square, I was watching his videos of Martyrs Square live on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he was an employee of the Daily Star was important, but the content that he was producing, I don't think I read one piece. And that's coming from somebody who has enough patience to read an article, but I chose not to.
Yeah. No, I mean, and obviously, um, all due respect to you, but I mean, there's a lot of people. The thing is, the Daily Star's audience, obviously, the biggest audience is inside Lebanon, and I think Taimur was one of the most. All of his articles were some of the most read that we had, and those articles that maybe you didn't come across. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that I don't think it's accurate to say that the articles weren't as heavily followed as Twitter. For not just
good
Taimur,
to
but
know.
anybody else.
Okay, that's good to know. So the numbers did not necessarily decrease because
no. But I mean, obviously, goes without saying. I mean, Twitter definitely helped. I got, I work with the Telegraph as well, and I think a lot of it had to do with my Twitter at the time, because I would tweet out the story that I was writing, so people know,
right,
they can see your work, and then other things other jobs that I've gotten have been through because of visibility on Twitter, and I think the same goes for Taimur and anybody else. But the fact that if Taimur, myself, or anybody else didn't have the credibility we had because of the Daily Star and because of the articles we wrote for them, I don't think you would have had that big of a people. You wouldn't have that credibility. You wouldn't have
that's
that
interesting.
respect.
So the visibility has to do more with the traditional sort of that the Daily Star is, at the end of the day, the most important part of that kind of story.
I mean, for me, yeah. I mean, if I didn't write at the Daily Star and I just started, tweeting and posting pictures, who's going to come look at my stuff?
Right.
They'll be like, who the hell is that? Some journalist. Where'd he come from? So why would I go to his Twitter?
Right.
So.
Yeah. Okay, that's and I say it as somebody as sort of amateur to this world that it is. I mean, because I do find myself kind of slipping a bit when it comes to the care for reading, given a moment that is very energetic and very it's euphoric and it's emotional and it's fast, and that it's almost like watching somebody's video or tweet or whatever, a photo with a caption. It almost it's quick delivery, but it is important to note that the content is much more important, and patience is required when it comes to gauging what is happening. So I think that you said it well.
I mean, look, but I mean, I also, I mean, what you're saying is accurate, because if you look in the States, I mean, Axios, the kind of trend they've taken along is, short, right to the point stories. And I mean, they've done well. But on the other hand, like you're saying, you need patience. I personally don't have patience. So I like to read things, if somebody sends me a video, or if I see a video, it's going slow for me. If there are subtitles and whatnot, I'm just saying, a story, I can skim through it and I can scroll up and down, back and forth quick. I mean, so I think, again, it's just based on your preference. And
I guess that's the skill of an editor as well, that you have to quickly assess.
Yeah.
And Joseph, as somebody who's still in Beirut, I left only a few weeks ago, and both of us, I think, witnessed the same story, which is Lebanon is going through a very difficult time. Remove the political demands, remove the chance for regime change or reform, just the economic situation is very dire. I wanted to ask you, away from journalism, away from the Daily Star, in your own view, do you see that a collapse is inevitable? And what I mean by that is, you hear well-intentioned advice, whether it's from experts in the field or even Lebanese at home and abroad that are dedicating their time trying to find a managed way out of this inevitable crash. But do you sense that the worst has yet to come? That what we're witnessing is still just the beginning of the pain that we're going through? Or is there any hope that we're going to be able to ride this out? Just your own sense on the economic situation.
But I'm not going to sit here like half of these folks on social media are saying, "Oh, I called this a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. This was going to happen. This was inevitable." I, I mean, I wrote I don't want to sound like them, but I wrote a piece for the Middle East Institute. I think it was last September or August.
It was a few weeks before this began. I think it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote that was based on a couple conversations I had with people in the banking sector, at the finance ministry, and other places. But also, it had more to do with the political side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But look, is the worst yet to come? In my opinion, I think we're not. Lebanon has not seen it hasn't collapsed completely. I mean, and I say that for a number of reasons because, and people can argue, however, whatever the percentage of this is, but you still go to restaurants, you still go to cafes, you're still going to different places where they're packed.
Yes.
Is it unchanged? No, of course not. It's definitely changed. It's less. You have restaurants closing. You have people unable to buy and spend like the way they used to, and that I'm not saying that things haven't changed, but I do think that there are still things that will happen that will hurt more. Changes in terms of reforms that are going to have to be made, be it if there's a direct IMF intervention, be it nothing changes, the officials decide to change nothing and things go more south than they have completely. So I think a number of factors lead me to believe that the worst is yet to come. Is it inevitable for there to be a complete collapse? I don't think there's a 100% chance that it's going to happen, but I think the chances are very high that there will be further deterioration of the situation.
And is that a precondition in your mind, in your own subjective view, a precondition for genuine political change, whether it's the way Lebanese identify within their state, whether it's the way the state behaves and a potential new social pact? I mean, is a proper economic collapse a necessity to move Lebanon in a better direction, or are the two, in a sense, unrelated? That political demands are there, but the economic challenges are there as well, and they don't always sort of directly correlate.
No, I don't think you can say they're unrelated, but I also don't think it's it's necessary for there to be an economic or an all-out collapse for things to change completely. But I do think that politicians, a majority of them, I don't like to say all of them, but I mean, I think a very high percentage of them are still in denial and still don't realize, the severity of the situation. And I don't think that I think they still believe in the old method. Here, people shouldn't be old school like me, but I think that they still believe in their old school methods, that, things will be just fine. We'll have a Gulf country, or, the West will come and bail us out. Things will be just fine. Lebanon isn't allowed to collapse. There's an international cloud of stability or protection above Lebanon. People don't want another war. I mean, these are all calculations that officials and politicians in Lebanon have had, I guess rightfully so, for a long time, because it's been accurate. But I think this time around things are different for a number of reasons, including the wide-scale protests and the amount of people in Lebanon that want change and don't want to live in the same situation.
So in a sense, it's too soon to see whether political change is on the horizon or not. We have to actually go through the economic, whether it's austerity or haircuts or whatever it is, these Eurobond experts suddenly that emerged out of nowhere, the ones you're talking about on Twitter, all these people that it could be years from now before Lebanon sees actual change. Did I get that right? That it's very soon?
Yeah, look, I think, like I said at the beginning of the episode, things aren't going to change easily. These guys have been in power for 30 years, if not longer. They came to power, a lot of them, at a time of war. I mean, a lot of them have blood on their hands. A lot of them are, they're shrewd, they're cunning, whatever other descriptions or adjectives you want to use, and they're not going to move over easily. It's going to take time. So I do think, that's why I said I think it'll take a bit of time. I can't tell you how long, but it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I do think, and I think Lebanon's did previously once shortly after the protest, and not because of the protest. I'm not one of those that says the situation in the country is where it is because of the protest.
Sure.
Complete nonsense. But it's the situation I think in Lebanon is going to go up and down for some time. As an example, the Lebanese pound, it hit like 2400, around 2400, the exchange rate at the beginning, shortly after the protest.
Yes.
And then it went back. It would fluctuate, and then it went back down. And the government was formed. It dropped a little bit to it hovered around 2100, 2200, sometimes 2000, which is still very high, but it was lower than it went back. I don't want to say, the pressure eased, I guess. The demand eased a bit on the dollar, a little bit, not a lot. But then now, this week, today, I think it went up in some places up to 2,500.
Yes.
I think it's going to continue to increase this week. So I think Lebanon has entered this phase where you're going to have a week or a couple weeks or a month of, you'll feel like you're getting out of this crisis, and then you'll have a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months where it's going completely down, and you'll feel like you're going completely down to the collapse, and then it'll kind of ease off. So I think that uncertainty is going to remain. The uncertainty that Lebanon's lived in and experienced since its independence, I think is just going to be exacerbated now, and I think that's what it's going to be like for the foreseeable future.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember conversations from the end of the Civil War and the turning point, the late 80s, early 90s, and that kind of uncertainty and anxiety, and and I remember the lira devaluing very quickly. You remember these notes that were printed so fast, whether it was the 500, the 1,000, and then suddenly we have the 10,000. We skipped over the 5,000 just to keep up with inflation, and then suddenly you have these new notes, and people are getting used to a crazy figure like 3,000 lira to the dollar, and that's not that long. I mean, it's 30 years ago, but that's the Lebanon emerging from the Civil War, and it almost. I mean, I know things are fundamentally different today, that we're not coming out of a 15-year war, that we have some infrastructure, even though it's mismanaged, and even though a lot of what we expected to work after the Civil War didn't work, but we're not coming out of a 15-year, 150,000 people getting killed or invasions or that kind of magnitude. But the anxiety, forget the violence for a moment, the anxiety, I remember it almost seems like it's the same kind of, we don't know how bad this will get. And I only worry that this kind of longevity of economic pain and suffering, it not only causes permanent damage, but it prevents anyone in Lebanon from really, really trying again. That we've been given so many chances over time in our recent history, and since, really, you said it, even since independence, to make this country work somehow, that I fear that this might be the last shot, that it becomes too difficult to put this country back together in a way that works. Now, you've been dating yourself, which since we started, you're calling yourself old school, and you're going through, the old ways. How old are you?
I shouldn't tell you because you're gonna laugh.
You're probably in your 20s, right?
I'm 29. I'll be 30 soon.
Okay, I'm going to keep this in the episode. You're not old. You're young. You're born in the 90s. You're totally fine. Okay.
Yeah.
But do you, I mean, a decade apart in age, do you have that kind of, whether it's pessimism or just sort of that you see that this might actually be the final chance we have to move on from the Civil War? Or are you perhaps more hopeful that if we don't get it right this time, we will have another chance to get it right later.
Yeah. No, look, I don't want to sound, and I don't think I'm an idealist. But I mean, from my perspective, a realistic point of view is you can't compare. I don't think you can compare any decade to another, especially in Lebanon, for a number of reasons. Obviously, the civil war is the major one, but the people that you saw in the streets, or the people that you will see in the streets are our generation. I mean, you're saying you remember the end of the Civil War a bit,
Yes. Yeah.
but I mean, and I think it's safe to say you don't have blood on your hands. You didn't kill anybody. You didn't kidnap anybody.
Right.
I don't think you were. I could be wrong, but you weren't old enough to remember during the Civil War. Your family member being kidnapped or slaughtered, or in the Civil War.
Right.
So it's a bit different for us in terms of this generation. I think in terms of thinking differently, being a little bit more optimistic. You have, if you speak to, I'll speak to older people here in Lebanon that lived in the war, and they'll tell you, oh, this country's never going to change. This is how it is. But I think you have people for the first time that are not blindly following like the sectarian system of the country, that don't care if there's equal representation between Muslims and Christians in the country in different posts. I think they just want and care about somebody being competent and capable of doing a decent job. And so that's, for me, that's one glimpse of hope, is that there are people that have started to think about that. But in terms of it being the last chance, I wouldn't agree, because I think in order for it to really change, you got to start. It's a grassroots project, and you have to start from the kids that are in elementary schools now, teaching them basic things, not to litter, not to throw stuff out the window when they're driving, where you still have people doing it now. Teaching them basic things of recycling. I mean, these are small things that you have to instill in a society for it to be, in my opinion, a properly functioning one. Having respect for one another, yada yada, just basic, simple things that even people our generation might not have completely. And so I think you still have another generation that needs to be taught, trained, whatever you want to call it, and to come, to take the reins of the country later on. But some people, might say, "Oh, Lebanon's not going to last until then." And this is all hypothetical, so it remains to be seen. But all in all, I think I am optimistic about the long-term future of the country. But in the short term, and when I say short term, I think it's 3 to 5 years. I don't see it being the Lebanon people most aspire for it to be.
Well, then in a way, you're kind of that bridge, because you're just old enough to have that kind of fear of what the war was like, even though you didn't necessarily live in it, but you have your parents perhaps reminding you of how bad things were. But you're also young enough to have that kind of hope that the next generation, whether it's yours or the one right behind yours, may have the tools at some point to really make this country work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of also the culture in Lebanon. There was always, no, the older, you have to, and yeah, you should respect your elders, but it was always like, no, they know what they're doing. Let them, control or run, the country. And obviously they weren't able to do it. They share large. So, you have more and more people becoming educated, more and more people graduating, more and more people not able to find jobs. So it's only a matter of time before you have, something like the protests happen in a country like Lebanon.
I really appreciate your perspective on what's happening, and I really hope, even though you've left the Daily Star a few days ago, I really hope that paper manages its way forward, and I look forward to engaging your pieces, whether it's in the Telegraph or other outlets down the road. And I'll link up your article at the Middle East Institute and your Twitter feed and your general bio. And thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.